The day began as usual in the bustling office building of a mid-sized corporate company. Employees shuffled through the halls with coffee cups and laptops, exchanging quick greetings before heading to their desks. In this structured chaos, John Miller, the department manager, ruled his domain with a firm hand. John was known for being a stickler for rules, often micromanaging, and showing little patience for those he deemed beneath his position. Despite his managerial competence, his leadership was often marred by an air of superiority, particularly toward junior staff and support employees. That morning, a new janitor, Mrs. Rosalind Carter, quietly began her duties in the main office area. She was a petite, elderly African-American woman, her silver-streaked hair neatly tied back, and her kind but weary eyes spoke of a lifetime of hard work. Rosalind moved methodically, pushing her cleaning cart, wiping down desks, and emptying wastebaskets with precision. Her movements were unhurried but deliberate, embodying the grace of someone who took pride in her work, no matter how menial it might appear to others. Despite her quiet demeanor, Rosalind couldn't help but notice the tension in the office. Employees worked diligently but seemed cautious, often whispering when John passed by. His presence exuded authority, but not the kind that inspired respect, more the kind that demanded submission. Rosalind had seen managers like him before. Still, she focused on her tasks, determined to stay out of trouble. As lunchtime approached, Rosalind finished mopping a section of the floor and hesitated. The work was physically demanding, and at her age, a short break to rest and eat was necessary. She approached John's desk, where he sat typing furiously on his laptop, his face a mask of impatience. "Excuse me, sir," she said politely, her voice calm but clear. "May I take a short break for lunch?" John didn't even glance up. His fingers continued to hammer away at the keyboard as if she hadn't spoken. After a pause, he finally acknowledged her presence with a curt response. "Lunch? You're here to work, not to take breaks. If you can't handle the job, maybe you should reconsider if this position is right for you." The words stung, but Rosalind maintained her composure. She clasped her hands tightly in front of her and took a deep breath before replying. "I understand. Thank you." John gave a dismissive wave, already immersed back in his work. Rosalind turned and walked away, her posture still dignified, though her expression betrayed a flicker of disappointment. A few employees nearby exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to intervene or speak up. They had all learned the hard way that questioning John's authority only brought trouble. As Rosalind returned to her cart, she felt a wave of exhaustion, but pushed it aside. She had endured far worse in her life than an impolite manager. Still, the exchange lingered in her mind. She quietly resumed her work, making a mental note of everything she observed around her. After the interaction with John Miller, Rosalind returned to her duties with an air of quiet determination. Though outwardly composed, she was carefully observing the workplace dynamics around her. The tension in the office was palpable, and she could see it reflected in the eyes of the employees. Conversations were brief, movements were calculated, and there was a sense of unease that lingered in the air whenever John walked by. As the day progressed, Rosalind began to piece together the unspoken rules of the office. John wielded his authority like a weapon, targeting those he perceived as weak or subordinate. His interactions were notably more dismissive toward employees from diverse cultural or ethnic backgrounds, which Rosalind found particularly troubling. She noticed how some team members avoided eye contact with him entirely, while others maintained a facade of forced politeness. It was clear that John's leadership style bred fear, not respect. Rosalind's cleaning duties took her to different areas of the office, giving her a vantage point to observe the interactions that unfolded throughout the day. At one point, she overheard a conversation between two junior employees near the break room. "I can't believe he said that to you," one whispered. "It's so unfair. Why didn't you report it?" "And risk losing my job? No way," the other replied with a sigh. "You know how it is here. We just have to deal with it." Rosalind continued working, but her ears perked up. It was becoming increasingly clear that John's behavior wasn't just a one-time incident, it was a pattern. He created a culture where employees felt silenced and powerless, and his treatment of staff often crossed the line into inappropriate territory. Later that afternoon, John approached Rosalind as she was wiping down a conference table. "You missed a spot," he said brusquely, pointing to an invisible speck on the surface. His tone was sharp, and his words were laced with condescension. "I'll take care of it," Rosalind replied calmly, reaching for her cloth. John lingered for a moment, his expression hard to read. "Make sure this room is spotless before you leave," he added before walking away. Rosalind's gaze followed him as he left. She'd encountered managers like John before, people who believed their authority granted them the right to belittle others. But this time, she wasn't just a cleaning staff member enduring his behavior. She had a different role to play, one that John could never have anticipated. As the day wore on, Rosalind continued to take notes, though not in the way most would expect. Tucked away in her cleaning cart was a small notebook where she meticulously documented everything she witnessed. John's dismissive attitude, the fearful silence of the staff, and the subtle but persistent indications of bias in his interactions. Each detail was a piece of the larger puzzle she was assembling. Unbeknownst to John and the rest of the office, Rosalind was no ordinary janitor. She was, in fact, a senior inspector from the Department of Labor and Workplace Equality. Her assignment was to investigate reports of unfair treatment and create a detailed assessment of workplace culture. This undercover role allowed her to experience the environment firsthand, giving her insight into the behaviors and attitudes that traditional investigations often missed. By the end of the day, Rosalind had gathered enough evidence to confirm her suspicions. John's behavior wasn't just problematic, it was emblematic of deeper systemic issues within the company. She knew that her next steps would have significant consequences, but she also knew they were necessary. As she pushed her cart out of the office that evening, Rosalind reflected on the day's events. She felt a mix of emotions: anger at the injustice she'd witnessed, but also a quiet resolve. The wheels of accountability had been set in motion, and soon John Miller would have to answer for his actions. The next morning, the office hummed with its usual activity, though there was an undercurrent of unease that few could pinpoint. John Miller arrived promptly, as he always did, ready to oversee the day's operations with his typical air of authority. He moved through the halls, issuing curt instructions and scrutinizing every detail. For him, it was just another day in his tightly controlled world. But this day was different. Shortly after John settled into his desk, the door to his office opened without a knock. He looked up, irritation flashing across his face at the unexpected intrusion. Standing before him was a woman, but not the one he expected. Gone was the janitor's uniform and cleaning cart. Rosalind Carter now stood confidently in a tailored navy suit, her posture straight, her expression calm but resolute. In one hand, she carried a sleek black briefcase, and in the other, an identification badge that she held up for him to see. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she began, her voice steady and professional. "I'm Rosalind Carter, Senior Inspector from the Department of Labor and Workplace Equality. We need to talk." John froze, the blood draining from his face. For a moment, he was at a loss for words, his mind racing to process what was happening. "Wait, what is this? Is this some kind of joke?" he finally managed to stammer. Rosalind stepped into the office and closed the door behind her. She placed her briefcase on his desk with deliberate precision and opened it to reveal a stack of neatly organized documents. "This is no joke," she replied firmly. "I've been conducting an undercover investigation of this workplace, following multiple reports of unfair treatment, a hostile environment, and concerning management practices. Yesterday, I personally observed behavior that validates these complaints." John's mouth opened, as if to respond, but no words came out. Rosalind continued, her tone unwavering. "I witnessed you deny reasonable requests, belittle employees, and create an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. Additionally, your interactions reveal a clear pattern of bias and favoritism, which has fostered an inequitable workplace culture. All of this has been documented." John's confidence wavered. He leaned back in his chair, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Now, hold on a minute," he said, his tone defensive. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm firm because I expect high standards, that's all." Rosalind tilted her head slightly, her expression a mix of patience and resolve. "Holding employees to high standards is one thing, Mr. Miller.
Creating an environment where staff feel disrespected, marginalized, and silenced is another. She opened one of the files and slid a paper across the desk toward him. This is just one of the many statements we've collected from your staff. Combined with my personal observations, it paints a clear picture of your management practices. John's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the document. His eyes darted across the page, but the weight of its contents was evident in his expression. "This is outrageous," he said weakly, though his voice lacked conviction. "You don't understand how hard it is to manage a team like this." Rosalind didn't flinch. "I understand the challenges of leadership, Mr. Miller, but being a leader means fostering respect and equity, not ruling through fear and prejudice. And now, you'll have to answer for the consequences of your actions." She closed her briefcase with a snap and stood. "A formal review of your conduct has been initiated. Pending the results, you are temporarily suspended from your duties. I suggest you use this time to reflect on how your choices have impacted those around you." The gravity of her words hung in the air as she turned to leave. John sat in stunned silence, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Outside his office, employees exchanged curious glances, sensing that something monumental had just occurred.
The aftermath of Rosalind's revelation sent shockwaves through the office. Whispers spread rapidly among the employees, each retelling slightly exaggerated but rooted in truth. The janitor wasn't just a janitor. She was an inspector who had exposed John Miller's toxic leadership. For many, this moment was a long overdue reckoning. By noon, John's office was empty. His suspension had been officially announced in a company-wide email, which also outlined the initiation of a thorough workplace investigation. Employees read the message with a mix of relief and cautious optimism. For some, it felt like the beginning of a long-needed change. For others, it was a validation of their unspoken frustrations. Rosalind, now fully revealed in her professional capacity, spent the rest of the day meeting with employees individually. Her demeanor remained approachable, yet professional, encouraging staff to share their experiences without fear of retaliation. Many employees, initially hesitant, opened up about the toxic environment John had created. They described the constant microaggressions, dismissive remarks, and unyielding pressure to conform to his narrow standards. One junior employee, a young woman named Angela, broke into tears as she recounted an incident where John had publicly humiliated her during a meeting. "I thought it was my fault," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But now, I see it wasn't. Thank you for listening." Rosalind offered a reassuring smile. "Your voice matters, Angela. That's why I'm here, to make sure this workplace becomes a place where everyone is treated with respect." As the day went on, Rosalind's notes grew more detailed, painting a comprehensive picture of the workplace culture. It wasn't just about John. His behavior had trickled down, creating a ripple effect that affected the morale and mental well-being of the entire team. Rosalind knew this investigation wasn't just about removing one person. It was about addressing the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to persist. A week later, the company held a mandatory meeting to address the findings of Rosalind's investigation. The CEO, visibly chastened, stood before the gathered employees and publicly acknowledged the toxic environment that had been allowed to fester under John's leadership. "We deeply regret the pain and frustration many of you have endured," he said. "This company is committed to rebuilding trust and ensuring that every employee feels valued and respected. Effective immediately, new policies and training programs will be implemented to address workplace equity and foster a culture of inclusion." As for John, his suspension became permanent. He was quietly removed from his position, with the company citing violations of workplace ethics in their official statement. The news was met with quiet satisfaction by the staff, many of whom had long wished for a change, but never believed it possible. On her final day at the office, Rosalind took a moment to reflect. Her work there was done, but the impact of her presence would linger. As she packed her briefcase, Angela approached her with a small bouquet of flowers. "Thank you," Angela said softly. "You gave us hope when we thought things would never change." Rosalind accepted the flowers with a warm smile. "Remember, real change doesn't stop here. Keep speaking up, supporting each other, and holding your leaders accountable. That's how you build a better future." As Rosalind walked out of the building for the last time, the atmosphere felt lighter, freer.
She knew that her efforts had not only exposed wrongdoing, but also sparked the beginning of a cultural shift within the company. For the employees, her presence had been a quiet yet powerful reminder. No one, no matter how high their position, is above accountability. And for Rosalind, it was another step in her lifelong mission to ensure that fairness and respect prevailed in every workplace she touched.